Welcome to the BCSD Learning and Leading podcast, where we explore the topics that matter most to our families and school community. I'm your host, Ryan Lanigan, and with my co-host, Brandon Broughton. Today, we're going to be talking about a very serious and growing concern, teen substance abuse and vaping. Today, we're joined by Trooper Jason Klewicki, a school and community outreach coordinator with the New York State Police. Trooper Klewicki works directly with youth and families in our region. And Trooper Klewicki, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me in. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. This is obviously a topic that is continuing to escalate. We know that we've been dealing with vaping and substance use in teenagers for many years. However, as things grow and evolve, things become different. And our goal today is to really help our parents, our community, our staff, our administrators, working with an expert like you in the field and law enforcement. What are the trends and what are we seeing and what are the look fors and how do we help and support our young people to be safe? So with that, I'm going to just start out with asking you the question, from law enforcement's perspective, what are the most common substances used and the trends you're seeing amongst our teens right now?
Absolutely. So like you said, I work in the school and community outreach unit. So I'm the Troop E coordinator. So I cover 10 counties, and roughly in those 10 counties, I have about 77 different school districts. I would say probably the biggest problem over the last, I've been in this position for 8 years, and it really seemed to start spiking. Just before COVID, it was really taking off, is vaping. Vaping is a huge issue. And the things that they can vape aren't just limited to nicotine. Vaping can expand to THC, which is basically the drug that gets you impaired with marijuana. You can really, anything that you can heat up and create into a vapor, you can vape. So some drugs like cocaine, you can't get hot enough to vape, but there are other drugs like LSD that you can vape and things like that. So vaping is a really major concern. And I think part of that issue is that it's easy and discreet. It's very hard to catch. You can hide a vape pretty easily. It almost looks like a USB drive sometimes. So you can hide it in a pocket. On top of that, they also create products like they have hoodie sweatshirts that have vaping instruments inside them. They have different things that look like highlighters and various other products. So there's a lot of issues with just detecting the vape. And now some schools have purchased vape detectors and they don't always work as well as, you get a lot of false positives. They don't always work as well as you'd like. The biggest thing with the vapes is you can usually smell that real sweet smell. It's kind of distinct, but it's definitely not something, like marijuana that you could tell from like 3 blocks away that somebody's using. So it's very difficult to catch. We still have issues. I just recently talked to a school district yesterday that's a neighboring school district, and they have a huge problem with alcohol in the schools and just before school. So I guess they've had kids drinking out in the parking lot right before they're going into school, or even sneaking it in a container during school. So that's still, that's been around since I've been a kid. Alcohol has always been a problem, and then obviously parties afterwards. We've seen some pill use, but most of the pill use I've seen is usually the older, like probably college age students getting into the pills. So we've seen some of that. Marijuana, cannabis is a big issue, and it's still illegal for teens to use. However, it's like alcohol essentially. So it's a lot easier to get. So if you have an older brother or sister, they might be able to get it for you. Use a fake ID, or the one shop that never cards, those types of things. So students have been able to get cannabis and marijuana easier, which is a challenge. And then the edibles are a major concern too, because a lot of times these kids will get edibles, they don't know how to take them, or they don't read the instructions, and all of a sudden they take one, it doesn't seem to affect them, so then they take more and more, and all of a sudden it takes a while for it to get into your system, and now all of a sudden they've taken way too much. And the potency of marijuana has increased tremendously, which is a concern of ours too. So back in probably the 70s, like THC in marijuana was probably like 3 to 5%. So it was very, very minimal You could use it, probably never get addicted to it. It wasn't really a huge concern. Now, if you're buying on the street, you're probably looking at 25 to 35%, somewhere around there. And then if they're making it into concentrated cannabis, where they basically melt it down and create it into what they call a shatter almost, that can be anywhere up to like 85 to 90% THC, which is very concerning because we really don't know what the effects of that potency is compared to 3 to 5%. Yeah, it's not going to affect probably too much, but when we're looking at 85 to 90% THC, is it addictive? Does it cause other? I mean, there's a lot of concerns. And then if they're vaping marijuana, the concentrations there are going to be then in that 85 to 90% range, which is very concerning.
So it's leading to higher levels of impairment.
Absolutely. And the other major concern we have with teens is essentially if they're using drugs early on, let's say in their 15 to 16, 17 years old, the teenage brain isn't fully developed until the early 20s. So when you're introducing drugs and alcohol into that young brain that's still developing, it can greatly derail the brain development. And sometimes, it can cause delays, it can cause all kinds of issues if you start. And then the chances of addiction, if you start in your teen years, is much greater than if you hold off until, your late teen, early 20s and use, drugs or alcohol. Then you have a lesser chance of becoming addicted to that substance.
Absolutely. One of the things that I would love to just get your opinion on, and it may just be facts, but there tends to be, now that we're living in a world where there are legal marijuana shops that are sanctioned by the state and they are controlled, and the product is at least vetted so that that when you go in there to that store to shop, that you're getting pure cannabis, and that it has been regulated, so to speak,
Right.
because it's involved with the state. But there are many smoke shops around that are acting like those regulated sites that the state works with, that are selling products that are not being regulated, and therefore the potential that young people are getting their hands on what they think is a cannabis vape with THC, but they could be getting other drugs or other things such as fentanyl that could be mixed in, or things that are very, very dangerous. So not only are the high levels, as you talked about, the level of the drug, the THC is like exponentially higher and more potent than it used to be. But the fact that in these places that are now not regulated, that they could be maybe getting access to things that are even more concerning and dangerous, they could really be detrimental to use by anybody, but worrying about our students.
Absolutely. I would agree 100% with that. We actually have details that go on throughout the year where we will go into a vape shop and we'll spot check and see if everything they're selling is legit. But you can only, I mean, there's so many vape shops right now and small corner stores that are selling these products that it's difficult to keep up. But absolutely, if you're using something that might not be properly vetted and it isn't approved, you're really playing a serious game of chance. Because if it is laced with fentanyl, it can be, experimentation isn't what it used to be. Like right now, you can experiment with a drug, and if it's laced with fentanyl and no one has Narcan around, it could be a one and done type situation, which we don't want kids to have. Especially like some of these kids prior to marijuana becoming legal were actually creating a lot of this stuff like in their basement or offline and just looking at how to do it online, like YouTubing it, figuring out how to make this vape pod liquid to have THC in it. And a lot of those were situations where kids would end up in the hospital because of lung irritation, and because it's so many things. Like when we take the vaping, you're taking essentially an oil, you're heating it up to it turns into essentially an aerosol. A lot of people think, oh, it's just water, just flavored water, has nicotine in it. No, it's not water. It's not water vapor. It is actually, it's an aerosol when you inhale it into your lungs. And that aerosol can contain like metals, it can contain different chemicals. And when you heat those chemicals up, they have a different reaction when they go into your body. And that can cause inflammation in your lungs. And a lot of times you'll find students that take a vape, all of a sudden might pass out and end up in the hospital, hooked up to a ventilator because of the lung irritation. So it's a very, very dangerous situation to be in when you're vaping things that aren't officially approved. Obviously, just the nicotine alone has addiction effects that we're concerned. But some of the other things that you could vape, and like you said, that could contain different chemicals, can be extremely dangerous and deadly, not just the addiction side of things.
It's a very different world we're living in. And, for our parents and our staff and our administrators, the job that we all have to do together to keep our kids safe is very important now more than ever. Trying to kind of transitioning to our families, but I think this would actually be something for within our buildings for our administrators and teachers and other staff that work with our kids every day. What are the signs or things to look for? I know that previously when I was a building administrator, talking with law enforcement, we were kind of put on alert that kids were taking and sharing things like candy bars that were psychedelic. They had mushrooms in them, and these were psychedelic candy bars, and really said, be on the alert that things like, if you see kids sharing chocolate bars at a high school, that probably should tip you off that maybe that something weird is going on there, or other candies. And talking about edibles, they were saying there is a difference if you really look intently. Gummy bears that are edibles that are late, put like cannabis gummy bears are bigger than the traditional gummy bears, and they look a little different. And so just trying to be aware of maybe some trends and signs. I know that we were looking at things like what the kids in school might be wearing, so the paraphernalia, or if I'm a parent, like looking in the cell phone, certain emojis meant certain things. And just trying to be more alert and cognizant of what's going on, because kids are very good at using code and figuring out how to work around a system. But as adults and the folks that are trying to keep them safe, how do we help with that? And what are the trends or things you're noticing now, or that maybe you've seen from law enforcement's perspective more recently?
So you're definitely right. I mean, there's a lot of clothing out there that will indicate, what somebody might be into. I've seen all kinds of different things. I mean, back in our day, it was 420. Everybody knew that 420 was marijuana. Now it's actually 710, which is oil upside down. And so 720 or 710 is the new 420. So if somebody has a shirt that says 710 on it, that likely means that they're into, vaping oil or vaping THC, things along those lines. A lot of the websites out there you can go on, and there's one guy that's his site, I think is Tall Cop Says Stop or something along those lines, but it's Jermaine Galloway. And he actually provides a bunch of clothing issue or options that basically tell you what the kids are into or what they're supporting or promoting. So there's a lot of different websites you can go on, but it's always changing. There's always something new. So it's definitely difficult to keep up with, but.
Are there resources out there that if parents or even as schools we could start going to? I know you talked about websites, but like what are some resources that maybe to get some of this, and how do we like you said, the 710 thing that's that's unbelievable that that's the new, think
Right.
about that it's oil upside down on a t-shirt. There's got to be more of those. How do we stay up with the trends, and how do we make sure that we're educating our community and our families to know what their kids may or may not be into?
Yep. So There's a couple websites that I go to, and generally I use them to make my presentations. But one for parents it's called Get Smart About Drugs. It's led by the DEA, and it's basically a website for parents and guardians, educators, and it'll show you a lot of the new trends, what's coming out, things along those lines. Then they have one, Just Think Twice, which is basically more for older teens and college students. So that's also on the DEA website. And then they have the Cool Spot, which is for the middle schoolers, which is a little bit geared down, but still kind of gives them the awareness side of things. NIDA, National Institute for Drug Abuse, that is a great website if you want facts. All their stuff is clinical and tested and proven, and they're a straight facts about what the drugs do, how they work, all those types of things. But they have a lot of good resources to do it. So those are probably my main ones I go to. SAMHSA also, they do substance abuse and mental health, so they're pretty well involved. But those are basically the websites that I use primarily. But probably one of the biggest things, especially I'm a parent of four, and I have two older kids and two younger kids, and the main thing is just knowing what your baseline is for each kid. And I sat through a presentation years ago where it was put on by Patrick Crow. He's a Monroe County Sheriff investigator. And essentially, he gave a bit of advice. I was just there as a representative for the state police, just showing support for his program. But he gave advice to parents, and I kind of took it and I applied it to many different areas in parenting as well as other areas. But basically what he says is, every time when your kid gets home, ask them how their day went. And he says you're going to get the same similar responses every day. How'd you do today? Or how's school today? Great, I scored a goal in gym, I drew a bird in art, whatever it is. You develop that baseline for what's normal for your kid. So that one day where you say, hey, how'd your day go? And they sprint upstairs and slam the door shut. You got a spike. Kind of like a polygrapher. Polygrapher will ask you questions to develop a baseline, and then they'll look for questions when your heart rate is racing and it spikes. And all of a sudden, it doesn't mean that they're lying per se in a polygraph. It just means there's something different from this question to that question. So if you ask your kid every day when they get home, how'd you do? How'd you do? Or if you're a teacher, every day when you see your kids come into class, how are you doing this morning? How are you doing this morning? You develop a baseline for what their normal response is. So when you get that response, it just doesn't seem right. Okay, it might be something minor, might be something major, but something changed from yesterday to today. Now we got to figure out what's going on. So basically just knowing your teens, knowing what's normal for them. If they're normally eating a lot for lunch and now all of a sudden they're not eating anything, or they're normally in a good mood and now all of a sudden they're in a bad mood. And then you smell maybe that sweet smell of that just doesn't seem normal. Those are the types of situations where you got to start digging down deeper and find out, okay, what's going on? Are they hanging out with a different friend group? Are they, is there something going on in their life that might be different? All those types of factors.
That's great information. And we will, for our listeners, we will post all of those websites and all of those resources with our video links and, just to be able to have access. Thank you for sharing that, because that's phenomenal stuff. And you're right. I think getting to know really the baseline of our own children as parents, but also, as educators, we start to see erratic behavior. And it can be tough sometimes because we all know that teens definitely do have some elevated spikes just
Right.
hormonally, which does make it very difficult because sometimes those spikes may not necessarily have something to do with now they're in using drugs, but at the same time, you gotta try to calibrate that and be on top of that the best you can, because it is difficult for parents and staff to know, because kids can be temperamental and moody. It's part of your hormonal development, but at the same time, it could definitely mean something more serious and
Right.
problematic as you talked about. So I do think, trying to establish that baseline is very, very important.
Yep. And there's a lot of, anytime I worked on a gun and drug and addiction detail in the city for a while, when we were looking for people who are impaired by drugs, every drug is going to be a little bit different, but there are certain things that you can also look for as a parent or, as a law enforcement officer. They all work the same. But usually when I'm dealing with somebody, if they're acting unusual, a lot of times, like the eyes will tell you a lot. So if their pupils are really big, they might be on, it could be like cocaine, it could be different types of drugs that will affect your eyes differently. So your pupils will get really, really big, or the only drug that will make your pupils get small is opioids. So if you see like those little pin needle dot pupils, that's something to be concerned with. It could also be, a concussion or something else, but just an indicator to maybe get you to ask a few more questions, see what their responses are, see how they're, responding to you questioning those types of things. If they're using anything like heroin, you can look on their arms, see if there's any marks, needle marks, things along those lines. If they're using, let's say, if you think they're using cocaine, you look up their nose. If they're using cocaine, they're probably going to have some residue up there. A lot of things like that to look for. You get the dry mouth with marijuana use, so they have a really cotton dry mouth. Sometimes they'll get a lot of nosebleeds, things along those lines. So, like I said, different drugs will affect people differently. Like marijuana, if you pull down the eyelid, you'll see a lot of times when they're using marijuana, the eyelid will get really, really red if you pull it down. So that's an indicator. Alcohol, it could be bloodshot eyes as well as marijuana. So a lot of these things, I mean, there can be multiple things that could cause it, but just something to pay attention to. And if you see, a couple of these things, okay, maybe there's something there, maybe there's not, start looking into it. Maybe Google, get on Chat GPT and see if, what types of signs would be for certain drugs and what causes certain things. But the main thing is to just be vigilant and pay attention to when you see something that just doesn't seem right. It seems a little bit out of the normal. That's where we want to focus in on.
Thank you, Trooper Klewicki. Good to see you again.
Likewise. Appreciate the
We're going to
invite.
talk just a little bit about community response. And when we think about from a position in law enforcement, how are issues of drug use and vaping being addressed in the broader community right now? Is there any actions being taken that you're seeing either positive or not so positive results with?
Yeah, like I said, we're trying to crack down on a lot of the vape shops that are not following the law, that are not legitimate. So we're doing spot checks on them with a bunch of different agencies as well. So that's one good thing. We're trying to put out as much knowledge as we can. I'll tell you, like, I do presentations in school, and that's probably the main part of my job. And I would say the two hottest topics right now are drug awareness and internet safety. Like, those two are basically two of the presentations I do probably the most across the board. So education is a big thing because, like I said, especially when vapes first started, like, parents didn't know. They just, oh, vapor, it's water, it's not a big deal. They didn't realize that there's all these other chemicals and things that come in these vapes, especially if you get like flavored vapes. There's a lot of metals that are contained in those vapes that you're inhaling into your lungs. And essentially, the only thing we need to inhale in our lungs is air. Like, we don't need to inhale anything else, and anything else, it's not a good situation to have in your lungs. So, we're trying to do enforcement. It's difficult because, like I said, a lot of these things are legalized now. So marijuana is easier to get. It's not legal, but it's still easier. It's kind of like alcohol. I mean, if you really want to get it as a teen, are you going to get it? Probably. So it's tough, but we're trying to make adjustments and keep up as much as we can.
I think it's important for parents to know too, if a young person gets caught with a vaping device, a controlled substance, and they're in a public setting or at a community event or something like that, what are the kind of the ramifications of that? Because I think it's important that everybody understands that.
Right. So there can definitely be fines if you're caught with a vape in a public setting. You can be fined, and then we definitely try to go after the person that provided that. So whether it's someone that purchased it for them, or if it's a spot that's just not carding anyone or things along those lines. That's usually where we focus our main issues on. There can be a lot of times they'll assign, like, if a teen is caught with it, we'll try and get them to attend some types of classes to kind of let them understand like how dangerous these things can be, especially when their brain development is still early, and it's a major concern. There's a lot of different concerns that teens really don't think about But somebody like myself or other parents, are definitely concerned with. So we want to make sure that they understand why we're intervening, not just, okay, it's illegal. They say I can't do it, but I'm going to find a way to do it. We want to kind of let them know, this is illegal, and this is why, and this is what it can do to you. And it's tough.
And I'm sure there's, a difference in terms of, as you talked about, there's an educational piece too, first time offender, trying to help kids to learn about that and make those better choices in the future. And then obviously if you're seeing chronic or repeated offenses, then obviously then I'm sure that becomes progressively more challenging for the person.
Yeah, absolutely. And they can be put in supervision, persons in need of supervision, they can be basically attached to parole, or not parole, probation. I mean, if they're in a situation that's dangerous and they're repetitive offenders and things like that. So there's programs out there that they can be placed in to kind of monitor them a little closer. But it's a challenge,
If parents are looking for support with maybe either a partnership with law enforcement or within the community to help steer their child toward, better decisions or a better direction before something bad were to happen, is there anything you'd recommend in terms of what they might want to access?
The few websites I mentioned, they can go to for guidance as well. As far as the state police, we're always willing to come out and talk to groups. I primarily do schools, but I also do any community groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Rotary Club, like you name it. We'll come out and speak to anyone on the topics as long as we have the time and the manpower. We're always happy to do it. The county is great as well. Brockport PD is great. So there's a lot of different avenues, and each agency probably has their own methods of delivering the message. But we don't want to see medical emergencies, from these kids using drugs or things like that. So anything that we can do to help, we're always happy to participate and give guidance.
Which is outstanding. And we're very fortunate in our school district that we also have supports through local agencies and community agencies that do support students who may be struggling with addiction or substance abuse. So, this is definitely a everybody together initiative where the schools and the law enforcement and community agencies are working collaboratively to support our young people within our community to make sure they're staying safe. Trooper Klewicki, we really appreciate your time today. This has been amazing, and your knowledge and insight, I think, is going to be very helpful to our listeners. Before we close today, is there anything that maybe you want to touch on that we haven't brought up with you today, or just anything you want to really just reinforce to make sure our listeners are aware of before we close today?
Just to basically just to pay attention to what's going on, pay attention to any changes in these kids. Just thinking of some more resources as far as community goes. I think Delphi, they have a good program where they can intervene and help kids working through addiction, things like that.
And
that's who our school community partner is. It's Delphi.
Yeah. Yep. And they do a great job. It's kind of nice to have a community group like that that's willing to step in and help out, because sometimes law enforcement, we have the arrest and the granted in my position it's a little bit different, but sometimes kids will open up more to counselors like that. So that's a good avenue to go sometimes, because a lot of times we tell kids, don't do this, or whereas they have a little bit softer approach, we can kind of show them, okay, these are the repercussions if you go down this pathway, become addicted. And we've seen both sides of these issues. So but yeah, as many resources as you can find, definitely use all the ones you can find, and anyone's willing to help out in those situations.
I really like the advice of just developing that baseline, having constant contact and consistent contact with your child to just notice those blips on the radar, kind of, or if things start to seem funny. It might be nothing, but it's just good for you to be able to kind of have that noticing, and also just get you in the habit of just checking in regularly, which I think with a lot of different things we've talked about this year on the podcast seems to be a key ingredient.
Yeah, I would agree. So I've used that with my kids. Like, to give you an example, this was a couple months ago. Like, my kid normally very happy when he gets home. And this one time I was like, "Hey, bud, how'd school go?" And he just went up right upstairs and shut the door and got on his iPad. So I went up, asked him what's going on. Nothing. What's going on? Nothing. By the third or fourth time, he finally told me he got bullied on the bus and got picked on. So it was a real minor thing. We took care of it. We addressed it, and it was over. But it definitely works when you set up those baselines.
Mm-hmm.
And I teach all kinds of different safety courses and things like that. And just developing those baselines for your grocery store or the mall that you usually go to or your school, and just knowing what's normal. So when you can spot something that's not quite normal, you instantly pick it out. And like I said, sometimes it might be nothing, but you might spot something that's in the process of becoming something. So that's definitely, I use that for a lot of my classes that I use, and I think it works.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Trooper Klewicki. This has been great dialogue, amazing information that I think will be very valuable to our families and our staff and our community, as we all look to make sure our students are safe. And obviously we know as things continue to grow, this will evolve and there'll be something new and different. And, we're trying to stay in line with the curve, I guess, the best we can. But, thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So for our listeners, thank you so much for being a part of and tuning into the BCSD Learning and Leading podcast. Continue to stay curious, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.